Some houses hold secrets. Some secrets are better left undisturbed. But what happens when curiosity takes over and you unlock something that was meant to stay hidden? I think houses like Bart 2 deserve some respect. Cut to a dimly lit, abandoned house as the story begins. The house is blackened and burned to a crisp, and the fire is finally out, saving the camper from destruction. It all started when Lucy and her family moved into an old Victorian house at the edge of town. The place was cheap, far cheaper than it should have been for its size. Her parents brushed off the unease with jokes about fixer-uppers, but Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them. The first few days were uneventful, filled with unpacking and settling in. But on the third night, Lucy heard it. Soft tapping, coming from inside the walls. "Jackson, what's probably mice," her dad said with a shrug. But Lucy wasn't convinced. While exploring the attic, Lucy stumbled upon something odd. A small, locked door embedded in the far wall, hidden behind old crates. It was barely 3 feet tall, and the wood looked ancient, cracked and warped with age. "What's in there?" Lucy asked her mom. Her mom frowned. The realtor didn't mention anything about a hidden room. Maybe it's just storage. Lucy couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, she dreamt of the door. In her dream, she could hear whispers behind it, calling her name. The next morning, Lucy found a rusty key under her bed. It didn't belong to anything in the house, or so she thought. Her curiosity burned until she couldn't resist. She climbed to the attic, key in hand, and inserted it into the lock. With a deep breath, she turned the key. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passageway. A foul smell wafted out, like rotting wood and mildew. Lucy hesitated, but a strange pull drew her forward. At the end of the passage was a small room, lit by a single flickering bulb. The walls were covered in old, yellowed wallpaper, peeling to reveal strange markings underneath. Symbols she couldn't understand. Beast symbols. It looked like the same marks Valentine had noticed. It was the first thought to come to Shauna. There was no way that was happening. She focused once more, lifting the ball box, ready to head into the cavernous room. In the center of the room was a rocking chair. It was moving, ever so slightly, though there was no breeze. On the chair sat a doll, its face cracked, one glass eye missing. It looked like it had been there for decades. As Lucy stepped closer, she heard a soft giggle behind her. She spun around. No one was there. That night, Lucy couldn't sleep. She kept hearing whispers, soft, indistinct, but unmistakably coming from the attic. When she finally worked up the courage to check, the small door was wide open. The doll was gone. Terrified, Lucy ran to her parents. They didn't believe her. Her mom even joked, "Maybe it's your new imaginary friend." But the next day, her little brother, Max, began talking to someone who wasn't there. He asked Holly if she and the others would mind the jump ship, and whoever was there. "She says her name is Annabelle," Max told Lucy at breakfast. "She likes you." Lucy's blood ran cold. She had never told anyone about the doll. Desperate for answers, Lucy searched the local library and found an old newspaper article about their house. Decades ago, a girl named Annabelle had gone missing there. Her parents claimed she used to talk to a doll, insisting it was alive. The article ended ominously. The family moved away shortly after Annabelle's disappearance. The house has remained unoccupied ever since. The remaining article described Crowell and his journey, starting in the fort to get safely to Halsey. Lucy knew she had to destroy the doll. She went back to the attic, armed with a flashlight and a hammer. The small door was open again, the passageway darker than ever. Leslie said. Lucy found the doll sitting in the rocking chair, waiting for her. Its head turned slowly to face her as she stepped into the room. Its single glass eye gleamed in the dim light. "You shouldn't have opened the door," a voice whispered. It wasn't coming from the doll. It was everywhere, inside Lucy's head, echoing in the walls. She frowned. Terrified, Lucy swung the hammer, smashing the doll to pieces. But as the last shard hit the ground, the room began to shake. The symbols on the walls glowed red, and the whispers turned into screams. The last room. The symbols on the walls glowed red, and the whispers turned into screams. Lucy ran, slamming the door shut behind her. She threw the key into the woods, hoping to seal whatever she had unleashed. The familiar thud of gravel and earth beat against her feet, and Lucy glanced up to see the hologramic creature rising deep into the night sky. When she ransacked her back, she finally came to the conclusion the matter was death to her. The family moved out a week later, but Lucy was never the same. Sometimes, she swore she could still hear whispers in her dreams, and every now and then, she would find a shard of broken porcelain under her bed. It all began with a seemingly innocent discovery at a flea market. Eliza, a collector of vintage trinkets and oddities, stumbled upon a peculiar doll. The doll, about 18 inches tall, had porcelain skin, a delicately painted face, and glassy blue eyes that seemed to follow anyone who walked by. Its hair was made of real human strands, golden and slightly tangled, tied with a faded ribbon. The vendor, an elderly woman with a wrinkled face and a voice like the creak of an old door, insisted the doll was unique. "She's been around for quite some time, dear," the woman said. "There's something special about her." Eliza's curiosity outweighed her skepticism. She bought the doll and placed it in her living room, among her collection of antique curios. For the first few days, the doll sat silently, just another object in the room. But then, strange things started happening. It began subtly. Eliza would find the doll in slightly different positions than she'd left it. Its head tilted to the side, or its hands resting in its lap when they hadn't been before. She chalked it up to her imagination, or perhaps vibrations from passing cars. But the unease crept in when she noticed the doll's glassy eyes seemed different. They no longer reflected the light as they once had. Instead, they seemed darker, deeper, almost alive. One night, as Eliza was getting ready for bed, she heard a faint sound coming from the living room. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping. She froze, her heart pounding. Gathering her courage, she crept down the hallway, the floorboards creaking under her feet. As she peeked into the living room, she saw the doll sitting on the edge of the coffee table, its tiny porcelain hand tapping against the wood. She stared, frozen in terror, as the tapping stopped and the doll's head slowly turned to face her. Eliza screamed and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a rug. When she looked again, the doll was sitting exactly where she had originally placed it, motionless and innocent. She convinced herself it was stress, a hallucination brought on by her overactive imagination. She moved the doll to a cabinet with a glass door, locking it inside. Out of sight, out of mind, she thought. But the doll wasn't done. Over the following nights, Eliza's dreams were plagued by vivid nightmares. In them, the doll would appear at the foot of her bed, whispering in a language she didn't understand. She'd wake up drenched in sweat, her heart racing. Then came the whispers. Late at night, she'd hear faint murmurs coming from the cabinet. At first, she thought it was the wind, or perhaps a distant radio. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They called her name, Eliza. Eliza. One particularly stormy night, the power went out. Armed with a flashlight, Eliza made her way through the darkened house. The beam of light fell on the cabinet, and her blood ran cold. The glass door was ajar. The doll was gone. Panicking, she searched the house, her flashlight shaking in her trembling hand. She found the doll in her bedroom, sitting upright on her pillow. Its glassy eyes seemed to glint in the dim light, and its painted lips were curved into a faint, chilling smile. Eliza's scream echoed through the house as the flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. "Help us," she moaned. Help us, Alith. My friend is dead. Lala. Help us, Alith. My friend is dead. The next morning, Eliza's neighbor found her sitting on the front porch, clutching the doll tightly to her chest. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, her face pale as death. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond to anyone. The authorities took her to a psychiatric facility, where she remains to this day, muttering incoherently about whispers and glassy eyes. Okay. As for the doll, it disappeared from Eliza's home. Some say it was taken by the authorities. Others believe it simply vanished. But every now and then, stories surface of a peculiar doll appearing in flea markets and antique shops, waiting for its next owner. In the shadowy town of Ravenswood, nestled deep within a forgotten valley, a legend lingered like an unspoken curse. At the heart of the tale was Eleanor Blackthorne, a reclusive doll maker whose creations were said to be unnervingly lifelike. Long after her death, her abandoned workshop, known as Blackthorne Manor, stood untouched on the outskirts of town, cloaked in decay and silence. It was a foggy autumn evening when Mia, a budding urban explorer with a penchant for the macabre, stumbled upon the manor. Her flashlight cut through the dense mist, illuminating the wrought iron gate tangled in ivy. The thrill of discovery ignited her curiosity, overriding the creeping sense of unease that clawed at her. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. Dust cloaked every surface, yet the dolls on the shelves seemed untouched by time. Rows upon rows of porcelain faces stared back at her, their glassy eyes glinting in the beam of her flashlight. Hair slipped thick rubber. Hair scrambled to her feet. Her hands identified parts, trying to decipher their motive. Mia's breath hitched when she saw it. A large doll, seated in a crimson armchair, its face strikingly human. Unlike the others, this doll had dark, shadowed eyes that seemed to follow her every movement. A plaque at its feet read, "Isabel." Mia's fascination led her to dig into the town's archives. She unearthed chilling details about Eleanor Blackthorne. Town records revealed that Eleanor's dolls weren't just lifelike. They were rumored to contain fragments of human souls. It was said that she crafted them for grieving families who could not bear to let go of their loved ones. But her creations claimed that Eleanor had dabbled in dark rituals, binding these souls to her dolls in exchange for eternal youth. When the town's children began disappearing, the villagers turned on her, burning her workshop to the ground. But the fire hadn't consumed everything. Over the next few weeks, Mia became obsessed with a doll named Isabel. She found herself returning to the manor, each time feeling more drawn to the doll. Strange things began happening. She would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of soft whispers or the creak of footsteps outside her bedroom door. One night, Mia woke to find Isabel sitting on the chair in her room. Her heart pounded as she swore she had left the doll at the manor. Trembling, she threw Isabel into her attic, locking the door behind her. Mia's nightmares intensified. In her dreams, she saw Eleanor's pale, gaunt face, her eyes like twin voids. The doll maker's voice whispered promises of eternal beauty and power, but always with a warning: beware the cost. Unable to resist, Mia returned to Blackthorne Manor one final time. There, she uncovered Eleanor's journal, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and instructions for a ritual to bind one's soul to a vessel. At the final page, a chilling line was scrawled: "The vessel must accept willingly." When Mia returned home, Isabel was waiting for her. The doll's shadow loomed unnaturally large against the wall, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Isabel's head tilted, and for the first time, she spoke. "Set me free." Terrified but unable to look away, Mia agreed to perform the ritual. She followed the instructions in Eleanor's journal, drawing the symbols and lighting the candles. As she chanted the incantation, a chilling wind swept through the room, extinguishing the flames. Her heart took a leap. Eleanor's hands squeezed into hers, her insides bitterly correct herself with stern reminders. The doll's porcelain skin cracked, revealing a blackened, human-like form beneath. Isabel's face twisted into a grin as she stepped forward, no longer confined to her tiny vessel. "Thank you," she hissed. Isabel, the Witch Queen, glowered down. Damned if she didn't wish everyone in the castle would just bawl and collapse. And suddenly the mirror was gone as the second person grabbed her. Porcelain and solid glass covered her mirror. In a horrifying realization, Mia felt her body grow rigid. Her limbs turned stiff, her skin cold. She glanced at the mirror and screamed. Her reflection was no longer her own. It was porcelain. Weeks later, Blackthorn Manor welcomed a new doll to its collection. Seated in the crimson armchair where Isabel once resided, Mia's lifelike figure stared out with wide, terrified eyes. Beneath her, a new plaque read, "Mia!" Ravenswood's legend lived on, and those who ventured too close to Blackthorn Manor soon learned the chilling truth. The dolls were always watching, waiting for their next soul to claim. Blackthorn scarred Oldback to see it. The townsfolk of Ravenswood couldn't ignore the renewed whispers about Blackthorn Manor. A local teenager named Ethan, lured by the promise of uncovering the truth, decided to investigate. He carried a camera and a flashlight, determined to document the eerie occurrences. As he stepped into the manor, the heavy silence swallowed him whole. Ethan found Mia's doll, her porcelain face frozen in an expression of anguish. He noticed fresh footprints leading deeper into the house, and against his better judgment, he followed them. The trail led to a hidden door, behind which a dimly lit staircase spiraled downward. In the depths of the manor, Ethan discovered a secret workshop. The room was lined with unfinished dolls, their faces contorted in half-formed expressions of despair. At the center stood a figure draped in shadows. It was Eleanor Blackthorn, her form barely human, her eyes blazing with an unnatural light. Like Eleanor, the creature had an orange clout. Unless it was a falsehood, Eleanor turned to Ethan and smiled. "You've come to join my collection," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. Ethan tried to run, but the dolls came to life, their limbs creaking as they moved to block his escape. He screamed as their cold hands pulled him into the darkness. The next morning, a new doll appeared in Blackthorn Manor's collection, seated beside Mia. Ethan's camera was found on the manor steps, its footage too corrupted to reveal the horrors within. The legend of Blackthorn Manor grew, and so did its collection. The dolls remained ever vigilant, their lifeless eyes a warning to those who dared to uncover the secrets. This is the tale of a doll whose origins were shrouded in mystery and malevolence, a story passed down in whispers, growing darker with every retelling. It begins in a small, forgotten village, nestled deep within the misty woods of Eastern Europe, where an ancient porcelain doll named Isabella. Came with us was a cursed artifact, an ancient porcelain doll, Isabella. The year was 1873 when the Bellamy family, fleeing the hardships of the city, relocated to the remote village of Morning Hollow. Their new home was a dilapidated manor, its walls heavy with the weight of untold stories. In one of the attic's cobwebbed corners, young Clara Bellamy stumbled upon a peculiar doll. Isabella was exquisitely crafted, her porcelain face painted with an expression of innocence that belied her sinister aura. Her dark, glassy eyes seemed to gleam with a life of their own, and her dress, a delicate lace gown, remained pristine despite decades of neglect. Clara begged her parents to let her keep the doll. Her mother hesitated, unnerved by its lifelike features, but Clara's father dismissed her fears. "It's just a doll," he reassured, unaware of the horrors that were to come. After a month, Clara took it up again. At first, Isabella seemed like an ordinary doll. Clara cherished her new companion, carrying her everywhere. But it wasn't long before strange occurrences began. "Whoever killed Rylas, sir," Clara began. "If nothing were done, he would somehow turn into an attacker, perhaps frightening the other dolls." Clara boggled. Then her eyes caught on something. Each morning, the Bellamys would find Isabella in a different spot than where she had been left. At first, they blamed Clara's playful antics. But soon, Clara started waking up with scratches on her arms and legs. "Isabella protects me from the bad dreams," Clara would say, her tone eerily calm. Isabella would tell Spouse, "We got awake with too much to eat, so we decided to have a drink. We have so much going on." The nights became unbearable. Doors creaked open on their own, and faint whispers echoed through the manor. Clara's laughter turned to screams as she insisted that Isabella was speaking to her, telling her secrets about the house, the village, and her family's hidden past. Meanwhile, Clara's health began to deteriorate. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and she grew pale and withdrawn. The once lively child seemed to fade, and the Bellamy's attempts to separate her from Isabella were met with violent tantrums and chilling proclamations. "She'll punish us if you take her away." Desperate, the Bellamys sought help from the village's elder, an enigmatic woman named Mariska. Upon seeing Isabella, Mariska's face turned ashen. "That doll is a vessel," she warned. "A vessel for a restless soul." Mariska recounted the tale of Isabella's origin. The doll had been created centuries ago by a grieving father, a toy maker whose daughter had died tragically. Using forbidden rituals, he trapped her soul within the doll, but his spell twisted her essence, transforming her into something malevolent. "Some would say he was far more powerful than she is," Mariska recalled. Mariska explained that the doll's curse would only grow stronger. Clara's life was at risk, as the spirit within Isabella sought a living body to inhabit. The elder revealed that Isabella's spirit thrived on fear and despair, feeding off the energy of those around her. The longer she stayed, the more powerful she became. Mariska urged the family to act quickly before the spirit's hold on Clara became permanent. Determined to save Clara, the Bellamys decided to destroy the doll. They tried burning it, but the flames flickered and died before they touched her. They tried burying her, but the next morning, Isabella was back in Clara's room, sitting serenely on her bed. Mariska revealed one final, desperate option: a ritual to sever the connection between the spirit and the doll. The family gathered in the manor's cellar, where Mariska began chanting in a language none of them understood. The air grew thick, and the temperature plummeted. Isabella's glassy eyes seemed to glare, and her porcelain cheeks cracked as if she were resisting. Him like hell, the Atreides must live beyond the calling. Suddenly the cellar was filled with an ear-piercing scream. Not from Mariska or Clara, but from the doll itself. Though Isabella was destroyed, Clara's behavior grew erratic. She spoke in voices that weren't her own, reciting events she couldn't have known. The Bellamys realized that while they had broken the doll, the spirit had found a new host. Mariska warned them that their fight wasn't over. "The spirit will not rest until it is destroyed," she said. But before she could explain further, she was found dead in her home, her body twisted in an unnatural position, her face frozen in terror. Clara's possession worsened. One by one, the Bellamys began to succumb to accidents that seemed orchestrated. Clara's father fell down the manor's grand staircase. Her mother disappeared into the forest, never to return. When the villagers finally investigated the Bellamy manor, they found it abandoned. All that remained was a single, unbroken shard of porcelain lying on Clara's bed, its edges glinting in the dim light. Years passed, and Morning Hollow became a ghost town. avoided by travelers and shunned by locals. Legends about the cursed Bellamy family persisted, but they were only part of the story. In 1951, Halsey set out on a tour of the Commonwealth, searching for lost works and missing objects. He learned Morning Hollow was haunted. Soon, ghost fortresses surrounded it, and the people disappeared. He went to the village and arrived just in time. The porcelain shard, carrying Isabella's spirit, was eventually discovered by a scavenger who sold it to an antique dealer in a neighboring town. The shard was fashioned into a pendant, which found its way into the hands of an unsuspecting child named Emily. Emily was put to bed with Dionysus silver, her favorite metal, and transformed into her mother. Emily's family began experiencing the same strange phenomena that plagued the Bellamys: whispers in the night, shadowy figures in the corners of their eyes, and objects moving of their own accord. Emily grew increasingly withdrawn, her behavior mirroring Clara's before her possession. Just as she had expected from her mate, so too her fated husband destroyed even more terrors than before. The curse continued to spread, leaving a trail of ruined lives in its wake. Each time, Isabella's spirit grew stronger, her influence reaching farther. The doll's story, once confined to a forgotten village, became a haunting legend told across the region. To this day, the legend of Isabella endures. Some say her spirit still roams, searching for a new vessel. Others claim to have seen the porcelain shard in antique shops or estate sales, waiting for its next unsuspecting owner. On the other hand, some may be trying to capitalize. I think it's worth a risk, if only for Virgil. Subtle middle act copyright. You found it. If you ever come across an old porcelain artifact with gleaming edges or lifelike eyes, remember the story of Isabella, for her curse is relentless, and her hunger for a living host knows no bounds. And remember, some things are better left forgotten. In the quiet town of Hollow's End, there was a shop so old that its origins were forgotten. Known simply as the Silent Ones, the store specialized in antique dolls, each one intricately crafted and eerily lifelike. The store had remained untouched for decades, the windows coated with dust and the doors sealed tight, as if guarding secrets too horrifying to reveal. The name of the shop, holding everyone's attention, was Hollow to Ruin. For years, locals whispered about the shop's enigmatic owner, a woman named Agatha Crane. Agatha was a recluse who hadn't been seen since the late 1800s. Rumor had it that she wasn't just a doll maker, but a practitioner of forbidden magic. It was said her dolls could capture souls. One foggy October evening, a young woman named Clara received a mysterious letter. It bore no return address and was written in elegant, spidery handwriting. The letter simply read, "Come to the Silent Ones at midnight. There is something waiting for you." Clara had always been curious about the old shop. As a history student fascinated by the occult, the invitation was irresistible. Armed with a flashlight and her journal, she decided to investigate. But what she saw filled her with dread and made her even more certain Clara was playing a terrorist trick. Somehow, Clara managed to escape but evicted Prince John and eventually returned to America, where he'd fought with the Covenant. All at once, there was the glow of a flashlight coming from the back of the shop. At exactly midnight, she arrived at the shop. To her surprise, the door creaked open with an unsettling ease. The air inside was cold and still. Rows of dolls lined the shelves, their glass eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. Each one seemed to stare at her, their faces frozen in expressions that bordered on terror. As Clara explored the shop, she found a ledger on the counter. It listed the names of people who had purchased dolls over the years. Oddly, every name was crossed out. Beside each name was a date, the same for all of them, the purchaser's date of death. Suddenly, a faint giggle echoed through the room. Clara's flashlight flickered, and she spun around to see a small doll standing on the floor. She hadn't noticed it before. The doll was unlike the others. It wore a tattered dress, and its eyes were unnervingly human. Before Clara could react, the doll whispered, "Help us." A sudden fall made several of the statues pray, laugh, and several fell. Clara stumbled back, her heart racing. As she tried to leave, the door slammed shut, and the dolls on the shelves began to move. Their tiny heads turned to watch her, their limbs creaking as they shifted slightly. Desperate, Clara grabbed the ledger and flipped through its pages. In the back, she found a note written in the same spidery handwriting as the letter. To escape the curse, one must return what was taken. The souls must be freed. Beneath the note was a sketch of a blackened heart encased in glass, labeled Agatha's Heart. A hidden door at the back of the shop creaked open, revealing a staircase that led down into darkness. Clara had no choice but to descend. At the bottom, she found a workshop cluttered with unfinished dolls. The walls were lined with shelves containing jars, each holding what appeared to be a tiny, glowing orb. In the center of the room was a pedestal holding a glass case. Inside the case was a shriveled, blackened heart. His clutching hands crouched low over the case. As Clara approached, the dolls from the shop began to pour into the room, their movements jerky and unnatural. They surrounded her, their whispers growing louder, pleading, "Free us." Clara realized that destroying the heart was the key to breaking the curse, but as she reached for it, a figure emerged from the shadows. Agatha Crane herself. Her form was ghastly, her skin pale and stretched tight over her bones, and her eyes were hollow sockets, glowing with malevolent light. "You dare defy me?" Agatha hissed, her voice echoing unnaturally. "These souls are mine." Clara grabbed a nearby iron rod and smashed the glass case. The heart pulsed violently, and Agatha let out a blood-curdling scream. The dolls collapsed to the ground, their lifeless forms scattering like marionettes with cut strings. "What are you doing, honey?" Clara asked, in surprise. "I don't know." She squeezed Clara's hand, but the heart wasn't destroyed yet. Agatha lunged at Clara, her bony fingers clawing for the heart. In a desperate move, Clara grabbed the heart and thrust it into the fire of a nearby furnace. The workshop erupted into chaos as the heart burned, releasing streams of light that swirled around the room. Agatha's screams faded into a whisper as she disintegrated into ash. The glowing orbs in the jars shattered, and a warm, peaceful light filled the room. The dolls were still. Clara escaped the shop just as the first rays of dawn broke through the fog. When she looked back, the Silent Ones was gone, replaced by an empty lot covered in overgrown weeds. Connor had found her. In her hand, she clutched a single doll, a reminder of her harrowing night. The doll's expression was no longer one of fear, but of gratitude. As Clara walked away, she swore she heard a faint whisper, "Thank you." She turned. Closing remarks for YouTube video? This story, The Silent Ones, is a chilling reminder of the dangers that come with curiosity and the price of tampering with the unknown. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories. Leave a comment about your creepiest doll encounter or the scariest legend you've ever heard. Until next time. The old toy shop at the end of Willow Lane had been closed for decades. Its wooden sign, once colorful, now hung crooked, its paint faded and peeling. People said the owner, Mr. Grayson, vanished one night, leaving the shop frozen in time. But among the dust-covered shelves and cobwebbed aisles lay a single object of interest, a doll named Abigail. Its reversed arm catching suddenly froze. It's as sawed as its horn. Abigail wasn't just any doll. Her porcelain face was delicately painted, her eyes a vivid blue that seemed to follow anyone who dared to meet her gaze. She wore a crimson dress, trimmed with lace, and held a tiny parasol in her dainty hand. Though lifeless, she had a presence that made the air in the room feel heavy, suffocating even. The townsfolk spoke of her in hushed tones, warning their children never to approach the shop, and certainly never to touch Abigail. When Clara and her family moved into the small, sleepy town, they knew nothing of the local legends. Clara, a curious and imaginative 12-year-old, often wandered off on her own. One grisly afternoon, while exploring, she stumbled upon the abandoned shop. The faded lettering above the door read, "Grayson's Emporium of Wonders." Her eyes ran over the brick fronts, the creaking wood, and the slanted roof of stone above the door. Peering through the grimy window, Clara could just make out the shape of Abigail sitting on a shelf, her blue eyes gleaming even in the dim light. Something about the doll called to her. Ignoring the whispers of unease that prickled her skin, Clara pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. "Calm, John," the god muttered in a low voice. He tossed a few strays on his shoulder. "Why a nice guy like you?" she asked herself, her heart thudding, and the air smelled of mildew and forgotten memories. Clara's footsteps echoed as she made her way to the shelf where Abigail sat. The doll seemed to radiate an unnatural warmth, as though she were alive. Without thinking, Clara reached out and lifted Abigail into her arms. "This way if we sneak out," Abigail said to Glinda. But Abigail tried to keep... That night, Clara placed Abigail on her desk. She brushed off the grime, revealing the doll's flawless complexion. "You're beautiful," Clara murmured before climbing into bed. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought she heard a faint whisper. "Thank you." Clara shot up in bed, her heart pounding. The room was silent, save for the sound of rain tapping against the window. Abigail sat motionless on the desk, her blue eyes fixed on Clara. Clara smiled, her blue eyes fixed on Clara. Abigail said, "Now shut. It's not funny. We'll get her back on the plane today." "No," Clara said. "Not exactly." Over the next few days, Clara began noticing odd occurrences. Her books would fall off the shelves. The closet door, which she always left closed, would be ajar. At night, she'd hear faint giggles or the soft rustling of fabric. Her parents dismissed her concerns, chalking it up to the stress of moving to a new town. But Clara knew something wasn't right. One evening, as she lay in bed, she felt the distinct sensation of tiny fingers brushing against her cheek. Bolting upright, she found Abigail sitting on the edge of her bed, though Clara was certain she had left the doll on the desk. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara started asking questions around town. Most of the townsfolk were reluctant to talk, but an elderly woman named Mrs. Whitaker, who had lived in the town her whole life, finally relented. "Mr. Grayson was a strange man," she began. "He made beautiful toys, but there was always something unsettling about them. Parents said their children would act differently after playing with his creations. Distant, like they weren't fully there. She came to me once afternoon. She said the large man had stolen the orbs and asked to be taken back to her island." Mrs. Whitaker explained how Abigail Foster, the young girl who went missing, had been a regular visitor to the shop. "She loved that doll," the old woman whispered, her eyes clouding with memory. "She'd sit in the shop for hours, just staring at it. And then, one day, she vanished. A week later, Mr. Grayson disappeared too, and the shop was boarded up. Finally, Abigail saw her move out of the shop's entrance. The story sent chills down Clara's spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that Abigail Foster's spirit was somehow connected to the doll, and that the doll's malevolence stemmed from the darkness surrounding Mr. Grayson. Abigail's behavior grew bolder. Clara would wake up to find the doll in different positions, standing by the window, perched on a bookshelf, or lying beside her pillow. Sometimes Clara would hear a faint humming, a haunting lullaby that sent shivers down her spine. One afternoon, Clara's younger brother Danny wandered into her room. "Can I play with your doll?" he asked. She looked up at him. "No," Clara snapped, pulling Abigail away. Danny pouted but left without another word. Later that night, Clara found Danny's favorite toy, a stuffed bear, mutilated in the hallway. Its stuffing was scattered and its button eyes were missing. Abigail sat at the end of the hall, her blue eyes gleaming. Clara returned to the library to dig deeper. This time, she found an old journal belonging to a shop assistant who had worked for Mr. Grayson. The entries were chilling. The assistant described hearing whispers late at night and seeing toys move on their own. "He's experimenting," one entry read. "He says he can trap a soul in porcelain. But I fear what he's done to that poor girl, Abigail." The final entry was scrawled hastily. "He's done it. The doll is alive. I'm leaving tonight before it's too late." That night, Clara confronted the doll. "Who are you?" she demanded, clutching a flashlight in one hand and a Bible in the other. The room grew icy, and the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe. Frantically, she reached up and grabbed the doll's arm, but it was utterly weak, and the doll only shook. Abigail's head turned, her blue eyes locking on to Clara. "I was lonely," a childlike voice whispered. "He promised to keep me safe, but now I'm trapped." "What do you want?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Freedom," the doll replied, "but it comes with a price." Basil. Abigail revealed that the only way to break the curse was to destroy the shop where she had been created. But the doll warned Clara that such an act would unleash the spirits of the other cursed toys. "They will not go quietly," she said. Despite her fear, Clara knew she had no choice. Armed with gasoline and matches, she returned to the shop. The building seemed to groan in protest as she stepped inside. Shadows danced along the walls, and faint whispers filled the air. Prit. With trembling hands, Clara struck a match and tossed it onto the gasoline-soaked floor. Flames erupted, consuming the shop in a fiery blaze. The cursed toys screeched and wailed as the fire devoured them. Abigail's voice rose above the chaos, her tone filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she sighed. "You've set me free." Clara stumbled out of the shop as it collapsed in on itself, the flames reaching toward the sky. She watched from a safe distance, tears streaming down her face. When the fire finally died, the air was still, and the weight that had pressed on her chest for days was gone. "Somehow, that has not been a guarantee," Beth said to Clara. In the weeks that followed, Clara's life returned to normal. The strange occurrences ceased, and the nightmares stopped. She never told anyone what had happened, fearing they wouldn't believe her. Years later, as an adult, Clara returned to Willow Lane. The toy shop was gone, replaced by a small park. At its center stood a single oak tree, and beneath its shade, Clara thought she saw a figure in a crimson dress. But when she blinked, the vision was gone. Though she would never forget Abigail, Clara took comfort in knowing that she had freed an innocent soul from a prison of porcelain and lace, and she vowed never to let curiosity lead her astray again. At the time, I was around 10 or 11, and my sister would have been 8 or 9. Long story short, our cousins, who we saw every weekend, had purchased a life-size knitted clown from an op shop or thrift store. I know what you are thinking. Why on earth would anyone buy one of those? My thoughts exactly. Anyway, from the moment this clown arrived at their place, weird things started to happen. I'll give you a couple of examples. They would place the clown in their bedroom, and when they woke up, it would be sitting on the couch or in the kitchen, and this went on for some time. One night, a few months after they got the clown, myself and my sister had a sleepover at our cousin's place. By this point, we were all super scared of the clown and didn't want it to be anywhere near us. So for whatever reason, we locked it in the outdoor dog kennels that they had at their place. Sure enough, when we woke up the next morning, it was inside the house, sitting on the couch. Myself, my sister, and our two cousins were at the back of their place, riding on the mini four-wheelers they had, and we stopped to have a break and chat. Then, out of literally nowhere, we see the clown running like it's human through the long grass, maybe 50 meters away from us. Terrified was an understatement. After 10 seconds, it had disappeared into the grass. We ran to our parents and tried to explain what we saw when everyone realized the clown wasn't on the back of our uncle's ute anymore. No one could understand, especially us four kids, after seeing what we saw. Eric couldn't bear to look at her parents, and he left the two kids in charge of Joseph. So we knew we couldn't face them alone again. That was the last time we ever saw the clown. We went back to the long grass where we saw it, but nothing was there. We talk about it still to this day, and honestly, still can't believe it. This story sounds like a load of BS, I know, but we know what we saw that day, and it's something I'll never get out of my head. I suppose the underlying question is, where did the clown go, and what had caused this to happen? For some context, my grandparents adopted me. I lived there until I was 18. I'm 22 now. Isolated. I had some pretty scary experiences, as did my other family members and any friends who stayed over. Strange noises, things moving on their own, whispers, etc. Those things didn't bother me much, as I never scared easily, but my grandmother did and still does have a collection of dolls that always creep me out. One in particular made me particularly uncomfortable. It used to sit on my grandmother's bedroom dresser, staring directly down the center of her bed. It was an old porcelain doll with a pale face, really thick curly hair, and a woven hat. Nothing especially scary about it, I just hated it for some reason. I moved out of their house right when I turned 18 and took all of my belongings with me. My bed, my dressers, everything. The room was completely bare. A few months after I moved, they mentioned that they were redoing my old bedroom and a couple of other rooms in the house. I moved across the state, so I hadn't been there or seen the room since the day I moved out. Living. One random night, I had a dream about my grandmother's doll. It was painted a dark blue, but the whole room felt eerily gray. I started slowly stepping towards it when I noticed the doll slowly turning its head towards me. I turned around and started to bolt towards the door, which then slammed shut. Ha ha, and I woke up. Ha ha. I get nightmares frequently, so I just brushed it off and went back to sleep. I figured it was no big deal, just like any other nightmare. About a month or so later, I went to visit my grandparents, hoping nothing would change. But about a month later, I felt her presence. I had a box of things I wanted to get from my old bedroom, so I headed up. When I opened my bedroom door, I shit you not, it was set up exactly like it was in my dream. Couch, nightstand, doll, bed. Mind you, I had never seen this room. Everything was completely different from the way I had left it. Nobody ever described it to me. I had no idea how it looked and couldn't have possibly known that this was the current setup, and it scared the shit out of me. I felt my heart drop. I was so terrified. I shut the door and went back downstairs. And he was like, yeah, you found her. And that was that. Once a year, my parents go on a vacation together, somewhere in the US, usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog, and for me to check on my Nana who lives in our basement. Normal, right? There's another important bit of background information. My dad takes part in this weird golfing competition with his friends. They meet in the supermarket, and when the people walk up, where if someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll as a sort of trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's just some running gag. Well, my dad won the competition, and he brought it home before he left. I am not at all scared of dolls. In fact, before he left, I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye in a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it and didn't really bother to ask. November rolls around and my parents leave for their vacation. Everything starts normal for a little while, but then things start to get weird. Because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll in my sister's bed and took a picture to send to her as a joke. She is in university. She hates dolls, so I leave the room with the doll still in there and head to my room just to send the photo and move on with my life. A few minutes later, I hear a massive bang. I jump, startled, and go look out into the hallway. My sister's room is slammed shut. Now our hallway has no opening windows, and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful. Without a doubt, its beak saw me. The windows are cracked and splattered. The corpses of the Frenchmen sit awkwardly surrounded by me. Even as the crime scene team spread and cautioned, the widow flipped the windows shut and started running back. A little on edge, I open her door and see the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was weird, but brought the doll back into my room and moved on. That night, I'm sleeping normally in my parents' room. Hey, better late than never. Your mama's in there. Should we play? The sound of a door handle crackles from my fridge, as if by accident, but faster than before. I have to sleep in there while my parents are away, because I need to keep an eye on my dog, and she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night, which is odd. I usually sleep all the way through the night, instead of staying up all night with you. Aside from that snored, I haven't eaten breakfast yet. I check the time and see it's around 3 a.m. This immediately freaks me out because I read that it's the witching hour. I glanced over at my dog and she's awake too, with her head up. And that also strange. I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee. But she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look at the closet too and see that it's open, even though I remember shutting it before going to bed. I quickly turn on the lamp and get out of bed to close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. Emmy. My teenage brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder, so I get back into bed, scroll on my phone a bit until I fall asleep. I wake up the next morning as usual to feed my dog. But when I go out into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door when I am not in it. Now it's still dark out because I have to feed my dog around 6 a.m. or she throws a fit. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor. I left it on my bed, I remembered last night, and now I am feeling paranoid. Leaves. But again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave, deciding to just have my door open. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep a couple of extra hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound. Loud enough to wake me up, the heaviest sleeper in my family. When I wanted to say something, the old woman sent me into the kitchen, where I came up with this story. Door. I saw the glass shaking as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud that it was shaking the counters. The strangest part is that my dog was just standing in front of the door staring at it. And she is the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely still outside, so I know my time. No wind at all. I text my parents and tell them what's going on. As soon as I do, the banging stops. They'd tell me it's probably nothing and not to worry about it. I went downstairs to see my Nana, but she had no idea about what happened. She's almost completely deaf, so couldn't hear it. She can't even walk up the stairs, so there was no way of her causing any of this. That was the last weird incident that happened. The next week, my parents got back. Cortesia, I didn't tell them everything that happened because I didn't want them to think I'm a chicken or something. Needless to say, I moved the doll out of my room until my dad brought it back to his golf team. Nothing strange happened after that. I still have no idea what went on during those couple of days, but it certainly was strange. I sort of wonder the story behind the doll now, but I don't really know if I want to ask my dad. Update. Halsey walked away and the door closed behind her. I asked my dad if anyone else had occurrences, and he told me no one else actually takes the doll into their house. It just stays with their golf stuff. He said one heard some weird noises, but that's all I found out. I'll start by saying I personally did not witness or experience this, but the story comes from a close family friend whom I consider reputable and honest. I'm rather a skeptic when it comes to most paranormal activity, but I believe this story because of the man who told it. So, as a little bit of background, my father was a police officer for 25 years through the 80s and 90s. His best friends were mostly officers, so growing up I always met and was around cops. Some of my father's cop friends were annoying and rude, and some were really squared away nice guys. One in particular was my favorite. I won't use his real name, so I'll just refer to him as Bob. Bob was one of my father's closest friends and beat partner for a long time. He was an older African-American man from New Orleans. Calling him Bob got him to turn his back, and he started beating me. He was polite, had great mannerisms, and carried himself confidently. My father used to say he was the most honest cop he ever worked with and had solid integrity and bravery. One night, my father and him worked an off-duty job at a local event, some sort of carnival or fair. I can't remember exactly, but there was a clown there. My father told me the entire night Bob was acting strange, acting uncomfortable, quiet, and shy. When my father asked him what was wrong, Bob said, "I just hate clowns." Always have. My father started poking fun at him for being scared of the clown, and he said Bob just stared at him with this look that he had never seen him do before, like he was genuinely afraid. So my father asked why, and this is Bob's story. Bob grew up in New Orleans. When he was a child, his mom took him to stay at his aunt's house for a few weeks. Bob said he didn't care much for his aunt. She wasn't mean to him, but he always got a strange vibe when around her, like she carried an evil aura around with her. His family used to joke that his aunt was involved in voodoo and black magic, but they mostly just said these things in jest. His time at his aunt's was largely uneventful, with the exception of a strange rule she had. He was not allowed in the kitchen. Bob didn't understand why, but he followed it. On some nights, Bob claimed he heard his aunt talking to people in the kitchen at odd hours. In the mornings, he would question his aunt if she had friends over, and she would say she didn't. On the front doorstep, she heard them all scream. Glancing over the mess, he saw Bob sitting there. His aunt had a thing for dolls. She had them all around the house. He hated them. He said whenever he passed by the cabinets displaying them, he always felt he was being watched, but she had one doll she always carried around and protected like a treasure. You guessed it, a clown doll. He said his aunt loved this thing, always took it with her around the house, caring for it as if it was a child. He didn't understand why. It was ugly and horrible looking, and he was frightened by that one the most. One night he said he smelt his aunt baking something sweet and conversing with someone. He got excited and ran into the kitchen without thinking about his aunt's rule. When he ran in, he saw on the counter the clown doll, moving its mouth and speaking to his aunt in a man's voice. The clown turned its head and looked at Bob. His aunt turned around frantically and scolded him out of the kitchen. He said as his aunt rushed him out of the kitchen, he heard the clown doll laughing. Slowly she flipped the switch, and the clock back on the wall moved slightly down further. After that night, he never left his room and barely slept. His aunt claimed he was imagining seeing the clown talk. He never went back after that incident. Sam sighed. His aunt even made a trip to Houston to attend Sam's funeral, which he stayed at the Symphony, for which he was the producer. My father, who is a big-time paranormal skeptic, believes Bob. He said he had never seen Bob's eyes or body language display so much discomfort and fear. He looked at my dad square in the eyes and said, "I know what I saw." But I don't believe you have Bob's address, I am sure. And I know how it sounds. But I'm telling you, it happened. That doll was alive. Yes, whether you choose to believe it or not, I do. Because I know Bob. And he's just not the kind of guy to make up something. Or claim something he wasn't sure about. I hope you enjoyed. When I was about 7, my aunt gave both me and my sister really nice dolls. They were like infant-sized. My sister's doll had blonde curly hair tied up, blue eyes and a white dress, with different colored hearts. Well, she was scared of it. I think dolls just freaked her out in general. So my grandma kept it, and for some reason hung it on her wall. I've always wondered why she did that. I never got to ask her, so if anyone knows. She really just hung the doll by the dress with a nail above her bed? I just thought it was something to do with a Mexican superstition. It wasn't like she had a ton of dolls everywhere either. Her hair fell over her face, and both her legs were in his hands, gripping tightly to his arms. It was just this one doll. Well, we all had to sleep with it just hanging there because it was a one-bedroom house. Then, within a couple of days, we all started having nightmares about the doll trying to kill or harm us. Then the healer came back, and the sensations went away. It was as if nothing had happened. My sister and I slept on the floor, and she woke me up and said the doll was calling my name, not hers, mine. I told her to shut up because I thought she was trying to scare me. And then she started crying and said, "No, I'm serious, please." I drowned her out and fell back asleep. I had a dream that I was alone in my school cafeteria and a little girl was singing the ABCs, and I just knew she was under the vending machine. And then her hand reached out and grabbed my... I walked to it, and then my ankle got sliced when I got to the vending machine. I fell and couldn't walk. Our cafeteria had a stage, and I looked up to see she, the doll, was peeking her head through the curtain, laughing at me. Then I woke up, another day. I overheard my mom and aunt talking about their dreams they had of the doll, and they all included just them and me. Like I was the only one, including themselves, that was in the dream. My mom said she and I were running from the house, that we both jumped in the car and she saw the shadow of the doll next to the car window, that I kept telling her to let the doll in and she wouldn't, so I started biting her. Then my aunt said the doll and I were sitting on the couch and I was acting and dressed weird. She said I was dressed like in old-time little girl's clothes and that when I talked, she never saw my mouth move, that the doll was talking in my voice. She had a bad vibe, and once we realized that she felt a bad vibe, we attacked her. As for my grandma, she refused to take the doll down. I kept having nightmares of the doll, and so did everyone else. Then, finally, like anyone else would do, I took the doll and took its eyes out because I thought if she couldn't see us anymore, it would stop. I put the doll back up, and my family was horrified. I did not want an arse-whipping, so of course I didn't come forward and say it was me. My family was sure the doll was cursed and blessed the house. The doll was gone the next trash day. For a week straight, my grandma prayed to us in Spanish and threw holy water, the moment you walked through the door. Then one day, me and my sister were playing. She's like, "You have to be happy now, 'cause Grandma's doll wanted you sad." And all I told her was to shut up. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me through my email, which is also in the description below. As always, a huge thank you to everyone who continues to support me. I really do appreciate it. Stay safe,